towards or from, that bottom is, so I like to focus on that, on the part that we don't see, and is preparation. Now, I'm going to take for granted that any pianist already knows the data of your part, which is notes, dynamics, articulation, that type of data. I'm not talking about interpretive ideas, because that's not really data necessarily. So you need your ABC to formulate words, to formulate sentences, to formulate paragraphs, chapters, meaning, concepts, and then it goes beyond that. So we should assume that as conductors, when we work with the soloist, that data is there. Meaning we expect you to play the right amount of notes at the right tempo, at the right rhythm. Now, why are these things super important? And this is one thing that conductors and pianists that play concertos, we have in common. That we can never practice this genre. You can practice your part, I can imagine the score, but we can never practice playing together with an orchestra. I can never imagine what am I doing? Nothing. There's nothing I can do except understand what needs to be prepared at the right time, in the right sequence, for things then to work magically. They appear to be magic, right? So, just with a show of hands so that I have a sense, how many of you were at Sunday's performance, matinee performance with the symphony? Anybody here came to see the marathonic? Just raise very high since it's a bit dark. Okay, so just to give you an example in case you don't know the details. So there were 8 soloists, each of them with a movement. Almost all were different movements, completely different pieces, except one piece got repeated twice, which was Rachmaninoff's Concerto No. 2, first movement. But other than that, every piece, every moment becomes unique. Now, each of them only had one rehearsal. So that's what I was telling you about. That one rehearsal is something that we can never practice, because we don't have an orchestra at home, and we don't have a soloist at our disposal with an orchestra to practice. So rehearsal doesn't equivalent practice. So, and one rehearsal means really you have 2 rehearsals. The first and the last in one, which is different than when you have 2, right? But we'll get to that. But you kind of have to know that in how you prepare. So once the data is there, we conductors need to know and absorb and remember quite quickly what is it the soloist needs from us too. And let's put a few scenarios simple. So I'm going to give you things in order to go back to that first stage, which is how do we prepare independently of each other. So if the soloist starts the tempo of a movement, then I have less of a responsibility because it's the soloist who better knows the tempo, so then the tempo can be picked up. And for instance, Mozart's D minor piano concerto, the soloist actually not only establishes the tempo, plays for quite a bit. Sometimes it's a shorter time, but it's the same relation, like with the opening of Rachmaninoff 2, you can't quite tell the tempo at first, but when you start hearing, okay, there's some sort of tempo. So my responsibilities are a little bit less, but then when I have to start the tempo, my responsibilities are huge, because if I don't know your tempo, then so how do I prepare that? Okay, so what about that? How do I prepare the potential scenarios? Okay. So I have to imagine all possible tempos, particularly when there are no metronomes. And there are very few concertos that actually have metronomes. And then we have some concertos that have metronome markings that have been played by the composers themselves on the piano, like Rachmaninoff or so, and they don't line up with what they wrote. So how can I prepare something that in which the data does not guarantee me that I will succeed? Or Grieg's piano concerto in the finale, there are a bunch of scales. Well, there are many concertos that have scales, and I have no idea how fast or slow will any soloist play them. So I have to prepare the same data in a slightly different way. So, but let's assume that the facts such as notes, rhythms, dynamics, articulations are there. And I would suggest that do not break the basic information. Do not tamper with it. Unless you really have a very good reason why the composer should have written something else, I would say stick with it, because our basis of being musicians come from those few elements. If you think about notes are just a few. Well, considering then some concertos like Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto has how many notes? Somebody told me once, this is like, I don't know, 30,000 notes or something like that, outrageous. That's still very little compared to music. You can have 3 notes and make great music. You can have 1,000 notes and make great music. And not necessarily more notes will make more music, or you'll be more musical because you play more notes, okay? So this is what I want to make sure, that the data doesn't make you a musician. The data only is the point of departure for anybody. So playing with an orchestra cannot be practiced, so there's no replacement for it. Literally. Listening to recordings won't help you. Playing with a secondary piano will not help you. Playing in silence will not help you. So we're helpless in a certain way. So how do we go about preparing? You go to the source. And the source is a full score. Now, this would be the equivalent, for instance, for a violinist that wants to join a string quartet. Violinists only read the treble clef for one simple reason. This is the lowest note in the violin. And I can read that's a G below middle C, so I can read that in treble clef. I don't need any other clef. So I can be an amazing violinist, and you'll be surprised how many amazing violinists only read one clef because they don't need it. So it's a question of need. So the moment you work with an instrument that has a different clef, now you have to read their clef. Otherwise, you'll be both at a disadvantage or not being able to understand the composition as a totality. So that means this violinist, hypothetically, now needs to learn the alto clef, if wants to collaborate with the viola, and then the bass clef. Now, they don't have to be masters at it, but they have to understand that it's a different world in which they are getting in. So working with an orchestra is very much the same for a pianist to play with an orchestra. Now, there are concertos and concertos. So I would start by, one of the principles is learn and study what you will need. So have an application. To study theory of music is only theory until there is music. If I want to learn about instruments that I will never use, that's only if I have free time, or if I find the benefit of learning that, will help me what I'm doing right now. So time is limited in our lives, and the first thing you should do on a daily basis is what I do: sleep. 1/3 of my day goes to sleep. Every single day. I'm not kidding. Every single day. Otherwise, I cannot function. Another part of the day goes to feeding yourselves well. So time goes by. And then time goes by with other things called life. Whether it's studies or this or errands. So choose what you're going to study based on what you're doing. So don't overstudy, and much less don't understudy what you will need. So that means you have to be able to handle a full orchestral score. I'm not saying you have to be masters in it, because that's our job. But one thing that a piano reduction will never do is give you the full picture of what you're working with. And that, to me, is the beginning of the success of that encounter, let's call it encounter, not a rehearsal, because it's an encounter. You only have one first time. There's no second first time. And sometimes the first time is the only one time that you have this encounter with an orchestra, and that's what we're going to talk about. So, there are concertos that have different instrumentation than others. And if you have a full score, this is not rocket science, the instruments are listed. Now, they may be listed in languages that you don't know, but this is where the fun begins. Once you enter the world of an orchestra, even as a piano soloist, there's no way back, because you've entered a realm and a world that doesn't exist anywhere else. Because any instrument and any combination of instruments can be part of an orchestra nowadays. So that means there's so much room, to be creative with one thing that scores never tell us as far as data is concerned. I've mentioned notes, dynamics, rhythms, articulation. But no score, not a single score in the world tells you how the sound is. Espressivo, with bravura, stürmisch bewegt. So, but I cannot get to that if my ABC is not there. In that world of sonorities, apologies to my colleagues in other fields, only an orchestra can do it, because it's the combination of musicians also that may think alike or differently, playing the same instrument. So, and this is just getting to establishing what are you going to be working with. So everybody that is playing with me soon, you must know who is next to you, so that this is a concerto for piano with orchestra, and not like sometimes I've witnessed a concerto for piano against orchestra. Yes, we all have seen a little bit of that, and that starts because both parties, I'm not saying it's only one-sided, both parties don't understand each other, as in what are they supposed to do musically. So I expect that everybody knows the makeup of your concerto, and just open up the first page of a full score and it will be spelled in words. Now, as I said, there may be words that you are not familiar with, but how exciting to be curious about, I don't know this. I'm a very curious person, and perhaps that's the one thing that makes me learn what I don't know, or find out what I don't know. Every time I pose with a dilemma or something that will affect or impact my growth as a musician, it bothers me in a good way. Like, I need to resolve this if it has an application to what I'm doing. If an instrument has something and I don't know what it is, I'm going to do anything I can to find out what it is or why a composer put it there. Now, sometimes we don't know why, because to this date, Brahms has not returned any of my DMs via Instagram. None. So, we'll never get to that. Why did he write that? Well, but that's exactly the beauty, because now we can go from there. So, sonorities are one thing that scores don't tell you. Also because every person is unique the way we hear. And conductors have two instruments. There's one on the right side and one on the left side. Yes? You've seen conductors? Yes? No? Yes? No? Taking a nap. Okay. So yes, right side, left side. So what are the conductor's instruments? Shout. Yes, the ears. Yeah, you thought it was our hands. Our instruments are this. So what are your instruments? The pianist, you have one on the right side and one on the left side. What are your instruments? Your ears. Those are our common instruments, because we hear in equal levels. Now, we may hear slightly differently depending on where we are located. If you're next to a bass drum and the bass drum plays loudly, you may not hear on that side for a little bit, and so on and so forth. But we all use our ears. and your ears will get to the music, not your hands, not your fingers, not the piano. So now we are preparing to engage with each other as conductor and soloist using our ears or preparing to use our ears. One other thing I invite, particularly pianists, because we are by ourselves, we can just sit down and play entire repertoire without the need of anybody else, because the piano is such a versatile instrument, right? So if you want to get closer to know an orchestra, start playing with other instruments. That's perhaps the closest you can get. Now, you cannot play your concerto with one flute or play anything else. Play anything else. Play even accompany concerto with piano reductions or sonatas, anything. The more you play with other instruments, and pretty much every other instrument is far away from the mechanics of the piano. So doing that, you will get the sense of what other instruments do or require to do in order to play. One thing pianists don't do is they don't breathe because we don't have to breathe. So try once holding your breath as long as you can, like for, 2 minutes sometimes, and play. You can play eternally without breathing until you run out of breath. Wind players cannot do that. Scores don't say that, You're going to turn blue if you don't breathe, because it's the nature of instruments. So if you start getting, but don't get to know them. Make music with other instruments, and then you'll start realizing, I go like this, and they sound 2 seconds later. Why? Right? What is different that the emission of my sound and somebody else's sound doesn't line up or is harder than I thought? It's because the nature of every instrument and how sound comes out of every instrument is different. Now, furthermore, when you play, let's say, a piano trio or piano quartet, everybody would be like right next to you. So in an orchestra, like if you play a line with, let's say, a trumpet, the trumpet is like 30 feet away. And this thing here prevents, I know it helps the sound go that way, but it prevents the sound to go that way. So if you use your ears, you might be able to hear what comes your way. Anybody behind the piano will never hear what you're playing at the fullest. So that means that my ears as a conductor has to be so in sync with your output, and then we can start working together. But if your output is not, again, ABC, your data is not consistent, then I'm going to have a hard time hearing. And then if I can't hear you well, then I won't be able to connect. So what do I do as a conductor? I'm the intermediary between your sounds and their sounds. So give me what I need, so that in turn I can provide for you what you need. So I'll be quizzing all my soloists on the instrumentation, on the list of instruments. Now, what is the disadvantage of a second piano practicing or supposedly helping you? Is that it sounds like you. It sounds like you. Another instrument will sound like you. And that's the furthest away that will happen with an orchestra, because no instrument in the entire orchestra sounds like a piano or works like a piano or executes like a piano. So one other big difference is when we pianists, well, I'm also a violinist and other instruments, but we, all of us here, we already live in vertical sonorities because our hands allow this and our instruments allow. Guitar as well, accordion, there are very few. String instruments, very limited because they have 4 strings, they may be able to play, up to 4 notes together. So we have that advantage that we already are trained to live in the vertical world, and everything just moves in parallel vertical lines. Every musician in an orchestra, and this should not sound the wrong way. They are one-line players. Their instruments are one-line players. The horn only plays one line. So don't expect anyone else necessarily to know what happens vertically when you play vertically. And that's just the fact that many pianists forget. They just hear, I can hear this, and then why is this not happening? Neither better or worse, it's just a different world, right? That you can read more clefs than other people can read as well. So, nonetheless, working with a secondary piano, and much more so with what we call piano reduction, you know, the two-piano version of many editions, I think you should stay away from them if you can, or use them just for the information that you need, but don't ever think that that will bring you close to what you're going to hear, because just the layout already of what's in there, it's so far from what any, and even Haydn piano concerto in D, it's just very far. So, you can only predict hypothetical things. But if you look at the score, if you read your part on a score, and nowadays with the availability of scores literally in your palm, I would expect that everybody to have a sense of what happens in the orchestra when you play, literally when you play. Because many times the pianists are just accompanying the orchestra, or you're part of the orchestra. So without a full score, you'll never know. Even if the piano reduction may say, you know, or abbreviation of an instrument, it's the full score. So I want to see that every pianist that comes to an orchestral rehearsal, and all the ones that I work with, show up with a full score. Now, they may not be using it all the time, but they have it in case, you know, they heard new things. Last time I played with Manny Axe, he asked me a question about a bowing for the violas and cellos that he came across, and we even discussed that. So, because he heard something that he could use or work with. So, don't think that the first time you play this with an orchestra in any piece, then you're done. On the contrary, you know, it's a never-ending process, and lots of possibilities can happen. But so have a full score available. They're not practical to play, obviously, because there are like only four measures per page. So, however, now I've seen so many people using iPads to rehearse to avoid, you know, page turns. But that's a personal thing. So, the next big thing is, okay, you know who you're playing with, and if there's an oboe solo, and you're playing literally with an oboe solo. Okay, the oboe plays one note, you can play, you know, 10 notes or so at a time. So then now you need to know how to balance certain moments in which you can overplay an instrument, a single instrument, a solo flute, a solo horn, and so on and so forth. But you'll never know again until you have gone through. The person playing this tune is such an instrument. Now, you are in a position also to be, once you have identified those things, that you can literally see who's playing with you, because the winds and in most cases the principal horn, that trumpets don't have too many solos, long solos with piano, unless Shostakovich's first piano concerto, which is pretty much entirely for strings and trumpet, you can play with. So you can make things a lot easier if you actually know who you're playing with. So that's why that data is so relevant. Because if you know that a player needs to breathe, you are going to allow them the time to breathe. If it's a player that doesn't need to breathe literally, like a string player, then that's a different story. Like, for instance, Brahms' second piano concerto, second movement. It's pretty much a cello sonata with a little bit of piano over here, right? So you must know those things in order for your data to become music. So then the next big thing that I encounter in addition, so basically I'm telling you, what I encounter is great preparation of soloists knowing who they play with, and the ones that don't. Guess which ones are harder to make music with? Then the next big thing I encounter is sound/volume output. Not knowing how big an orchestra is, because not every score, actually any score, will tell you how many musicians are there. They may say 1 flute or 2 flutes, 2 trumpets, 4 horns, etc. But it will never say 10 strings or 15. It just says violin 1, violin 2, viola, cello, basses. So it depends on either the orchestra that you will get, or in some cases, the orchestra you may want to request. Because I've worked, and this is down the line, I'm just telling you the big horizon. Many times you work with what you get, and that's about it. But I would suggest you should find out how big is the string section you're going to play with. Even at your level, because you have to start paying attention when you go to concerts and when you watch concertos in person, not via recordings or videos, because very seldom you have on the internet or any recording, you have the view that you want. Many times you don't have it. I wish I could see the person. No, the camera is somewhere else, you know? So, and only when you go to watch other concertos, you are learning from the sideline, as I call, observing, but more importantly, listening. So if I see 7 basses, double basses, playing with the piano, you want to remember that. And that can only happen when it happens, not in a recording. Then you also want to be observing what sounds are being produced quality-wise. Are the strings vibrating? And the vibrato of the strings affects very much, one way or another, how soloists can project. And those are things that you can observe. Now, whether you request things or not, that's a different story, but you need to start capturing that the world of concertos is a huge world of sonorities. So don't ever underestimate any opportunity that you can go and watch a rehearsal of a piano concerto or a performance and be connecting all these dots, because it will happen to you. There'll be the time that you'll be sitting with an orchestra and then, I've seen this before. There were 15 violins, or there were 20 of this, and there was only 5 of them. And you'll be at an advantage already. But you need to know what to look for in order to take advantage of that. So the numbers of the musicians that may not be specified in the score is something that I suggest you start paying attention to if you ever want to play any concerto with an orchestra. So then the next thing is volume output. As I said, how am I going to be heard? Well, there are 2 possibilities. You are the minority because you are one person with a powerful instrument, and then there are like 60 behind you that can overpower you or can underplay when you are playing as well. Because the orchestra has that capability too, the capability of range of volume. At one point, the piano will reach the volume output limit. That's it. The instrument or your own physique will cap. There's no more. The orchestra, that doesn't exist. We can continue playing as loudly as humanly possible because of the combination of instruments. So, I've worked with people that play at all levels of strength, physical strength, and volume output. I played with Menachem Pressler when he was 93 years old, and he played Mozart A major 488. And we adjust the volume output to what he wants. And I'm not saying he plays softly. I'm saying to what he wants and what he needs. Then there are other pianists, and when I play with Fima Bronfman, you better have 8 basses, otherwise you are not going to hear them, because he can outplay 8 double basses if he wants to. So I cannot assume that because you may be young, you'll play softer or louder. There's no relation necessarily from that. But the one thing you have to assume is that you're going to have to overplay things when more people are playing. That's just a fact. You cannot underplay when more people are playing when you're playing. How are you going to know how many people are playing? With a full score. That's the only way. And again, you don't have to master a full score, but I suggest you have it, you start reading, use highlighters, colors, whatever you can do to get into our world so that it becomes your world and it doesn't become that the orchestra is an accessory. Because orchestras are not really accompanying. Some people say that we're accompanying, we're following the soloist. But if we follow the soloist, we'll be behind, if you think about it. We cannot really follow. We have to be in sync for this to happen at the same time. By the way, be thinking of any questions right now. And if at any point, I should have said this at the beginning, if there's at any point something that I'm saying and it's either not complete in thought or not clear, or there are terms and words that are not understood, just raise your hand or shout out, because I can't, it's a bit dark. And I'll be happy to continue that. So the question of volume is perhaps the one that catches novice soloists at the most off guard. What happened? I could be heard when I played in the studio. Well, yeah, because there were not 50 other people playing at the same time. How do you practice that? You can't, see? Even if you have 3 secondary pianos, because even the volume of more pianos rehearsing with you beforehand won't come close to the sonority. Because sonority and volume is the biggest thing that will take you off of your side. It takes me off my place of comfort all the time. So don't think that because you are either at the early stage of doing what you're doing or a later stage, it's the same. It's never comfortable at first, because every place that I conduct is different, even though it seems to be the same. So the venue is the same, but the people, the time of the day, the instruments, all of it always sounds different. But that's great. That's the beauty of music. It never sounds exactly the same. The moment we sound the same every single day of our lives, we're going to be replaced by machines if we haven't already by now. So that's why the predictability of the best scenario is what we go for. And you can only, and let me say this again, you can only start thinking of that level of enjoyment if you're not worried about anything else, such as your notes, your fingerings, you can always review them, but you have to realize that you will be more comfortable delivering on your music when you are not concerned about something else. Imagine when the ones that drive or the ones that bikes, when was it the first time you learned how to do this? You didn't have freedom, of realizing where you were. You might have gotten lost, or who knows. So it's no different than that, except you can't practice this. You can just hope that it will work. But that is what it is, and it's a good thing. So let's see, practice this. Ensemble. So the word ensemble comes from French language, right? From French. And in English it means only one word. What is it? Together. Simple. An orchestra is an ensemble as long as it plays together. You'll be part of the ensemble as long as you play together. And together in a concerto is a must to sound good. It would be the equivalent of saying, well, you don't have to worry about intonation, of hearing a wonderful violinist that plays completely out of tune. And you'll be able to say, oh, that was so musical, but completely out of tune. Well, it is not musical then, because the music starts really from a certain point on. Now, I'm not saying that we are perfect, and please do not aim for perfection. Perfection is boring. Excellence, it's exciting. So, I'm not saying I mean, things will happen always, always. Whether you expected or you didn't expect. There are some wonderful unexpected things that happen, and that's the beauty of excellence in music, not perfection. So, ensemble. If you have played alone for too long, you may not be aware what ensemble is until you play with somebody else. And now the bargaining for playing together becomes the beginning of a different relationship with 2 players, 3 players, 4, 5, and more. And the question, who is in control of togetherness? So when you have a conductor to work with, it's a give and take. Because you can't be really together with the orchestra directly, because we are the ambassadors. So you and I have to have an understanding of how do we work to be together. Now, in music notation, and I'm not a theorist or a musicologist, but over centuries, as music notation evolved to what we have now, the 5 lines, the pentagram, the staff, and we have all kinds of symbols and notes values. To me, there's only one invention, one of the greatest inventions in music notation that allows ensembles, large ensembles particularly, such as orchestras, and therefore concertos. One invention in music notation that allows us to play together. Imagine there's a whiteboard here. I'm going to grab a marker. I have a staff, and I'm going to write this invention. That's it. What did I draw? Bar. Yes. Bar line. And yet it's in front of us all the time. The bar line is the only thing at first that allows us to be together, that will allow you to be together. So that means knowing what happens on the bar line, it's equally important to know what happens everywhere else, but use the bar line as a point of start. Now, I want to see everybody holding an imaginary marker. Everybody? Hold. And I want to see you all draw a bar line. Let's do it together. 1, 2, 3, go. Draw a bar line. 1 bar line. Again, 1 bar line. Do you see me drawing 1 bar line? Okay. One more time. 1, 2, 3, go. Stop. Okay. See? I've asked this question everywhere in the world. Nobody has ever, that I've asked for, and I've done this in groups of hundreds, have you seen everybody draw the bar line like this? None of you have done it. Do you know why we do this when we conduct? Because that looks like the what? It looks like the bar line. So you kind of have to know that that's the beginning of our collaboration. When we do this, when I do this, the orchestra may play. Now you can start, etc., etc. If we do this and you haven't played there, something's wrong. As simple as that. So now we have 2 other instruments. These 2 ones, plus this. The eyes can hear so much. People think the eyes are there only to see. You can see it coming. So everybody put your hands like this. When I come back here, I want you to clap. When I come back here, okay? Well, somebody doesn't have a good sight. When I come back here. So everybody needs to know their job. Okay, let me see. I'm going to be very careful with this. When this lands in my hand, I want you to clap. Simple as that. That's what we do. You think we do fancy things? No, we do nothing as conductors. But if you don't understand the principle of the bar line, you'll be missing greatly, because you can use it every single bar when you need it. So this is when you look up, we should be available for you to whatever you need. So if ever a conductor has the back to you, you should say by all means, Mr. or Mrs., can I please see your hand? No, sometimes, because if you picture myself over there, so this hand is not the closest to you. But I can recreate the same feeling with the hand that is closest to you. So, hands together, ready to clap? See, I can do that too. So I can give you as a conductor the possibility of comfort while I'm busy doing something else. So, but you should know that this is possible so that you can ask for it when needed, And there'll be times that you cannot hear what's happening in the orchestra the same way they cannot hear what's happening up front. So they use, meaning the orchestra, they use their eyes to hear. What travels faster? Which speed? Sound or light? Then use your eyes when you cannot hear it. So we're constantly switching. In the orchestra world, we're constantly, and we conductors are switching from what we can see and from what we can hear. Many times when the soloist is about to go like this, I already know when the sound is going to happen, because I can use my eyes to see this. Or if there is I would know, because I can hear and I can see. If a conductor starts missing where you play, and I've mentioned this to a young conductor, try standing once on this side, and far enough that now all the keys are white. Isn't that a problem if all the keys are white? Because I have no idea which note is which. Do you know who Victor Borge was? Okay, you can learn a lot of music through him. And there's a great skit about the colors of the keys that will make you think, oh, yeah, I need certain colors to play certain things, and I need to see them beforehand. Playing with music versus playing without music. But that may be a question that come up, but I also want to address that in general. When I played with Nobu Tsuyi, who's completely blind and blind from birth, well, when you see him playing, but much more so with an orchestra, he never misses. Like that, and it always lands in the same place. Always. So at dinner, I asked him through his translator, I kind of wanted to know, how come you never miss? And then he said, I was asked to move his glass. Gracias. So I moved it. And then, of course, he missed it. And the point was, well, all the pianos are the same. Because he plays on the same piano, same type of piano. I said, so? Well, I'm not busy doing what you guys do. Something you're busy watching and getting distracted. So I can only focus on distance and space without worrying about it. So he develops a sense of distance and speed as well. So, and it got me thinking a lot, because I kind of knew about this. When you do one thing sense-wise, like listening, speaking, tasting, touching, then you're blocking the other one out, unless you are aware that you are doing two things at once. Like, how many right now are sensing what your hands are touching, wherever they are? Probably not, because maybe you were hearing what I was saying, or maybe you were watching something else. So, the eyes can also block your hearing. So when you read music in the context of music sounding, there's a chance, if you have not trained that well, that you will you'll stop listening. So whether you use music or not, music, it's a question of what senses are you engaging. Because you can train to hear and read equally, but those things don't just happen automatically because we as humans can do all these things by nature. But when we use them, these are disciplines that can be trained. Okay, let's take a moment for questions now. I see one hand, two hands. Okay, or maybe stand up, that way I can see you. Yes, yes, perfect. Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so let's start with the first question. Rehearsing, it's a twofold when you have a soloist. Now, this only works with this orchestra because if you were at the rehearsal, I know the orchestra knows the pieces. This doesn't work if the orchestra doesn't know the pieces because then you have to rehearse the orchestra too. So be aware that this is a combination of a one-of-a-kind situation in the world and a luxury at the same time that you have an orchestra that can do that. So I don't recommend anybody to assume that in one rehearsal you'll get anything. Now, it's 20 minutes, but the average piece, because that's what matters, is if your piece lasts 5 minutes, 20 minutes, it's a lot of time. It's 4 times the length. Now, if the piece is 50 minutes and you only get 20, then you have to see this differently. So what matters the most is the ratio of the length of your music with orchestra. So I highly recommend that you know how long do you play with the orchestra, because that's how you can make those 20 minutes value. If you spend 20 minutes using 5 minutes to play the cadenzas, then you're not getting efficient about it. So rehearsals with an orchestra are there to do that. So you must know that you can play your concerto from beginning to end endless times somewhere else, not with an orchestra. A rehearsal with an orchestra is to rehearse with the orchestra, number one. So you can maximize anything, and I know exactly how long the orchestra moments are by themselves. I know. This tutti lasts this tutti moment lasts this. Because if I have 50 seconds, I know I can play this. If you don't know how long your section lasts, you won't be able to do that. So you have, and also because I don't know your tempos. So I cannot be responsible for how long something lasts. Now, when you do repeats, if the repeats are done in the same venue, then there are no more rehearsals after the first performance. When you go to different venues, like for runouts, repeats, and tours, and anything like that, most likely there will be a sound check and a light check to make sure that things are placed in the right angles with the right light, and sometimes those could be like 5 minutes long. So that means I have to pick 3 things out of something long just to test the sound. But once you sort of opening night happens, there's no more rehearsing. Now, you can meet with a conductor and decide, I like this a little bit different, that's fine. But there's no rehearsing it. And the third one, does it get better? Well, not necessarily. What is TCU's rival these days in football? Is it UT? I don't know. Anyway, you can play every weekend, and who's going to win? Well, you just don't know. So it's a little bit like that. Give us another hand over here, so if you could stand up, please.
I was wondering, in your experience conducting all sorts of different things, how does the difficulty of conducting a concerto compare with that of an orchestral piece or something of an opera?
Yes, so conducting orchestral music alone, operas, and concertos. So conducting orchestral work is perhaps the easiest in the sense that the responsibility falls entirely on us. So if we tell an orchestra, we're going to jump off this cliff, they are all going to jump. That's what it is. When you have a soloist, the soloist may say, no, you jump, I'm staying up here. You don't have control over that. And in an opera, you have the same thing as a concerto, but amplified, I don't know, 100 times. Because you also have drama. And add drama to the whole equation. Even if it's comedy, it's drama always, then makes things more complex. So neither is more difficult than the other one. I'm just giving you scenarios for a conductor. Where does your role fit? And I would say symphonic repertoire, you are in charge. Concerto, you are sharing responsibilities. And in an opera, you are like here, because you work with the stage director. And everything then starts from that relationship. And all of them are wonderful musical worlds. Anything else? Is there a hand or you're just stretching? Oh, yes. Aha, a very good question, because every member of the orchestra needs to know his or her part on their own. And depending on the concerto and the composer, it can be very simple lines or very complicated lines for any musician. So it starts there at home. So I have no idea how long every musician works. Now, in the professional world, I would say that in one rehearsal, we should be able to have learned an entire piece. However, speaking of piano concertos, there was one piece that I rehearsed and I performed with the Philadelphia Orchestra years ago. And we were on tour, not just in Los Jardines de España, Nights in the Gardens of Spain. Arnaldo Cohen was the soloist. And so it happened that we had one rehearsal for the entire program because we were on tour, and that piece was on that concert only, and Dvorak Symphony number 8 in G major, which is about 35 minutes long. Okay, we hadn't played that in Philadelphia, so we start rehearsal at 10 in the morning, and we plan to rehearse 1 hour. It's a 23-minute piece. And that piece was going nowhere. Like the orchestra's like, oh my goodness, because it's not really an accompanying concerto, like a symphonic poem for orchestra and piano. It just, this was going nowhere. We reached the point of taking a break, and in discussing with the concert master, and yeah, we have to rehearse this more because like, and I looked up, when is the last time you have played this? Because it sounds like, well, I mean, I'm a familiar face to the Philadelphia Orchestra, so I could say, this doesn't sound comfortable. And they look up the dates because they tend to write the dates of the last performance. It was 30 years ago when Alicia de la Rocha played it. So nobody remember even the tunes or how it went. So anyway, I said, yeah, we have to get this one right. So we kept rehearsing that piece. So I was left with 6 minutes at the end of the rehearsal for a 38-minute symphony that we had never done together. But obviously at that level, I know that I know the piece, they know that they know the piece. So the only thing that occurred to me was to ask, does anybody have any questions about this piece? And there was one hand, the flute, wanted to know what's the tempo of the solo, and I went, bam, ba-da-dam, ba-da-da-da. Okay, thank you very much, have a great concert. So, and that's the extreme when no rehearsals can yield an amazing performance because everybody is waiting to what's going to happen now, because we don't know the before, we only know the now. And these things can also happen because music can do that to us. You ready to close the session since it's almost 1 hour?
One very important point that I would like you to address.
Yes.
Especially with the young people. It was the first time we had Piano Texas in 1981. Somehow we arranged the manager of the New York Philharmonic, Los Angeles. We had some conductors on stage. I was very naive. And I asked, when do you book a future gospel soloist?
When do we book? Sometimes it's anytime. And sometimes it takes a long time before there's even an opening available. Because in programming, we can be programming 3 years in advance. Yes. So sometimes we Okay, you have the closest I can get you. It'll be in 2026, in October. Are you available then? Because normally that's how we looked at it. So it can take a long time for these things to happen. However, there are some competitions that can yield differently because there will be so-called placeholders that orchestras would say, we're holding this for whoever wins or for da. So, but that's the exception. So sometimes it takes a long time before you can be booked. Now, there are also possibilities that somebody cancels, and when do you need this by? Tonight. It happened here in Fort Worth under tragic circumstances when Vadim Holodenko, who was just here, could not perform the next day. And there was one of those things, pianists are everywhere, but this is like in under 24 hours. And Alessio Bax flew in directly to the concert to play a different piece that we even had scheduled. And that was less than 24 hours because he happened to be in Canada at the time. He wasn't even in New York or nearby. Then there was another time that Horacio Gutierrez was to play here in Fort Worth, and literally for a 2 o'clock rehearsal, and I hear in the morning that he's not feeling well, he can't travel, he is not. So I went the other way around. Who is in the vicinity? This is when dear Jose was still around. He wasn't here, he wasn't like in town. So I kept looking a little bit further and looked up east in Dallas, and I rang Joaquin Achucarro. Said, Joaquin, are you free at 2? Well, depends. What? No, yes. Can you just come here and play? Play what? And say, what are we playing? Oh, because I forgot what are we playing. Chopin E minor. Yeah, I think if I get there, if I leave at noon, I'll move my lesson. So somebody drove him into the rehearsal. It was the rehearsal, at least, And he said, I'm sure by the time I get there, I'll remember the piece. So anything can happen in this life, and I've had it all.
But that brings up a very important point on my part called repertoire.
Oh, yes. Yes, you have to widen your repertoire as much as you can because you don't know what you're going to be good at. Honestly, none of us know. But if you only know one piece, you're not going to be good even on that piece because the width, absolutely. So I highly recommend start widening your repertoire. Even if it's a movement of this and something opposite, it will do wonders than just learning one concerto at a time when it comes to concertos. And the more concertos you know or you're acquainted with, oh, there's one thing, you're going to love this because I normally don't like the internet to refer to music because I like live music. But I've encountered lately on YouTube, there's an array of concertos with scores, and they scroll. That's a fantastic tool because in our days, the equivalent was you sat in the top of the theater, you brought a score, and there was a little desk. You couldn't see anything. You couldn't see into the house. And they called those study desks that you could follow the music happening live with a score with a little light. And I think that tool, you should use it. Put any concerto and add score. Sometimes it's a full score. Most of the time it's a full score. Sometimes it's a reduction. That's how you can also broaden your knowledge of repertoire. What is out there?
One more thing.
Yes, of course.
Whether you concur or not, but I strongly believe that you make a career through concerto.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Particularly nowadays. You make a career through concertos. Now, depends on what career.
Your best friend can ask you to play at this place or that place, open up a concert hall if you like. Won't make a career. The conductor makes you a career.
Right. Now, there are always exceptions to the rule. Always. Because, for instance, if you see Richard Good, amazing career. Does he play concertos? No. Even at the beginning. So, don't get us wrong. But nowadays, because it's a funnel, it's gridlock, it's everybody trying to get into the tunnel. But at the same time, I would say, if everybody wants to go through the Holland Tunnel to New York City, well, find other tunnels. It's a big world. This is a big country too. I mean, people love music everywhere. And your career really depends on what you consider your path of life with music. But definitely, bigger presentations like concertos with orchestras will push you further. At the same time, if it doesn't go well at first, then the damage is equally big. So it's, I mean, I'm using strong words, but yes, it can be as good as and as not so good if you jump, off the cliff the big way. And any last question? And if not, I hope to see lots of people on Sunday. Can they come to rehearsal? Yes.
On Saturday at
Saturday at 1 o'clock. I don't remember. I have to look it up. But it's Saturday afternoon this time. It's not right before. And that's the other thing. We have like a whole day to dream overnight. When the rehearsal is 1 hour before the concert, you have no time to even take a nap.
It is in the schedule.
Yes, please take advantage of those things, and I'm happy to chat with you there. 2 o'clock? Is that? No. 2 p.m. Yes. Excellent then. Well?
On behalf of this little group of Piano Texas, thank you so much.
No, happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you. I'll just be here if there are further socialing.
She's doing the 3 o'clock.
She's doing the